Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award-winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies, and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Well, welcome again to another edition of the Propertybuyer Podcast. I'm Rich Harvey. Now, Newcastle has been a very consistent performer in the Australian property market over the last decade. Originally seen as an industrial town with the BHP steel mill, which closed in around 1999, it's now matured into a thriving city and is the 7th largest city in Australia. Today, I'm joined by one of our senior buyers agents, Kevin Mason, a local expert with deep roots in the Newcastle and Hunter property markets. With a background in project management and a sharp eye for property potential, Kevin has helped hundreds of our clients uncover hidden gems and secure high-performing assets in this thriving region. In this episode, we'll unpack the Newcastle Hunter market and where it's headed, which suburbs are on the rise, and why more buyers are turning to professionals like Kevin to guide their property journey. So whether you're a home buyer, an investor, or just interested, welcome to the podcast. Kevin, it's great to have you on board.
Thanks, Rich. Lovely to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. So, Kev, we start with a little tradition with the Property Buyer Podcast where we have a thought of the week. And the thought this week is from Theodore Roosevelt, who says, "Believe you can, and you're halfway there." What do you take from that quote?
Look, I guess I've always been a glass half full person. So, look, I guess in life, if you surround yourself with people who know what they're doing, good professionals in your sphere, you'll always be successful.
Fantastic. Love that. Love that. Yeah, it's so true. The people you surround yourself with in your life have a huge impact. So it's life's too short for the wrong sort of people. Well done. Kev, I want to ask you some personal questions, I guess, to kickstart things. How long have you been in the real estate industry? And tell me what you love about being a buyer's agent.
Sure. I guess I first entered the real estate industry back in 1997. It feels like a lifetime ago, but awesome. Yeah, look, it's been great. I have worn many different hats, I guess, to get to where I'm today. But I've been with Propertybuyer now for just almost 13 years. But leading up to that, so I entered the real estate back in 97. Prior to that, I was in the construction industry as a carpenter. My dad's a retired builder. So I had that construction building background, moved into real estate as a selling agent, working for your big franchises like LG Hooker, Ray White, PRD, etc. So I cut my teeth there and then moved into project marketing side of real estate in Sydney, working for developers, builders through that inner west area. Investec Bank were the financiers back then. Then I was looking to put all that I guess experience together, and that's when I joined yourself, Rich, 13 years ago. And of course, been enjoying that part of it for the last 13 years, but probably more importantly, just being able to pass on all of that knowledge and experience to others. You know, that's what I enjoy the most.
Excellent. And I mean, you get some great testimonials. What do your clients say about, you know, what you've done for them? And I guess, do you like the thrill of the chase? Do you like kind of closing deals? Which parts of the process do you love?
Oh, I guess there's so many components that are enjoyable and rewarding, but I think the most important thing is really just helping others reach, just seeing others be able to get on the property ladder. I just see so many clients that are umming and ahhing, and you know, you can just see that often people are their own worst enemy, you know, where they'll just procrastinate. So just having a helping hand, someone who knows what they're doing, and of course we're building trust. And once they've got that confidence, and we're actually educating them along the way. So for them to become educated, it gives them the confidence to be able to move forward because they know they've got people that are looking into the best interests.
Yes. Yeah. Brilliant. Fantastic. Yeah. Love that. So tell us a bit about I guess, what led you to specialise in the Newcastle, Hunter and sort of Lake Macquarie areas? Is it, what's the reason you sort of know that area so well?
Yeah, look, I grew up through the area, so I was born and bred through the region, both through Newcastle, Port Stephens. So when I joined your firm 13 years ago, back then I was buying throughout Sydney, through the Newcastle area, and also jumping on planes, if you recall, heading up to Brisbane because I had a real estate licence for both Queensland and New South Wales. But there just seemed to be, we're just getting a lot more interest for the Newcastle region, and it made sense. Well, that's my background. I know the area like the back of my hand. So how about I specialise through that region, which is a large area, Newcastle, Lake Macquarie, Hunter, Port Stephens, Central Coast. I mean, they're large areas. So I guess that grew with the amount of interest we were getting and the exposure that Newcastle was getting. And we've seen that through the positive stats. A lot of the suburbs are in line in terms of the Sydney suburbs. The returns are higher than Sydney. So again, it made sense that I look to specialise in those areas, which I know so well.
Fantastic, mate. Wonderful. Now, Newcastle's got, I mean, every time I go up there, it's got a new vibe or a new feel to it. How do you describe the vibe of the place, if you want to use those words from that famous movie, The Castle? And I guess, how would you describe the Hunter region to someone who's perhaps not so familiar with it?
Yeah, look, I guess having lived in multiple areas from Queensland to Sydney, Newcastle, I remember when I moved from Port Stephens, Newcastle area to Sydney back in 2005, I remember the vibe and the feel of Sydney as just very businesslike. A lot of people, or there was less people that had time to talk to you. Everyone was in centre of business mode. You come into Newcastle and I asked the same question, Rich. It's a great question. I asked the same question for a lot of our clients who are just not familiar with the area, and I invite them to come up and I show them around the area. And the comments I get from those clients is, wow, it's relaxed. The people are friendly. I could, what a very little area. I can see myself living here. So I often put that back to new clients who I invite to travel up to just to experience the area, and they're the sort of comments that I get back.
That's great. Fantastic. People greet you in the street. I really love the beach areas. Yeah, exactly. It's wonderful. And there's so many waterways to do all sorts of things with up there too. It's got a really nice feel. And yeah, so let's talk some property stats, Kev. So tell us about the Newcastle market. What if I sort of had to work out a budget and I need to know what's the median house price and the median unit price currently sort of roughly in Newcastle? Tell me the range across the spectrum.
Yeah, okay, good question. Glad you asked. And correct, it is a range because, as we know, there are markets within markets. So we've got suburbs where street by street, the median value will be completely different between houses and units. So if we go a little bit further out to areas like the Hunter areas, such as your Maitland, East Maitland, which is one of the fastest growth areas in New South Wales, your median price point is a lot lower for houses. So we could, we're talking sort of between that 800 to 900 sort of range. If we come back into, some of the Newcastle areas, so we're talking about inner ring and middle ring areas, whereas your Maitland and East Maitland will be your outer ring areas. Go back to the middle and inner ring, we're talking then a house price range of between 900 to 1.5. If we go back to units, if you're wanting to buy in those trendy inner city areas or on the cusp, again, we're talking sort of around that, anywhere between 650 to $1 million, for units. And again, as we go further out, that drops away again, to a lower figure. So it does range. That's right.
But you don't have to go as far out. Like I'm thinking of, a house on the northern beaches, the average is like 2.5 million, but, a house in the eastern suburbs is like, 3.5, 4.5 million. Or if you're looking at Bronte with a view, you're looking at 25 million plus, right? But you look at something at Merewether or sort of more the upmarket areas. Tell us, it's obviously fantastic value, right? Where are the sort of more luxury pockets in the Newcastle market?
That's right. And when I mentioned earlier, just clarify, when we talk about outer ring areas, so East Maitland, for example, that's only a 35-minute drive. Whereas in Northern Beaches, of course, is a much longer drive from the city. So look, we're not talking about a long distance.
Gotcha.
But a lot of the prime areas, we're talking anywhere from your Merriweather, your Cooks Hill, and then if we go out to areas such as Katara, Lambton, we're only talking a 10-minute drive from the CBD. So again, and they're probably more the areas I focus on, but it comes back to budget. We work with the budget, and we will find those areas will provide the high growth, and the rental returns are usually 1 to 1.5% above your Sydney yield. So that's obviously attractive for investors as well.
Okay. So just on the yield question, so what sort of average yield could we get for a house, say, and then also for an apartment in Newcastle? Give us some estimates of that.
That's right. Good question. So Sydney, you're normally looking at sort of a 2, 3, 4% tops. Generally here, you're working around that sort of 4.5% sort of, I guess, on average. But then we'll go that little bit further. So if we do have a client that's looking for an investment property and they're chasing a slightly higher yield, we will then look for a property which may be a house plus granny flat. And of course, then that puts it up into the 5.5% range, even up to 6%, depending on, the return. So we're looking at multiple income type dwellings.
Awesome. Yeah, fantastic. How does Newcastle compare, say, let's talk about investors now. How does Newcastle compare to, say, other cities like Brisbane or Melbourne or Adelaide, for example?
Good question. Again, I think we could probably compare Newcastle with Sydney. I mean, we're only a 2.5 hour drive away, but in terms of capital growth, because we're always looking at the stats, of course, and I often will compare. So I'll pick out a couple of suburbs here in Newcastle for a client, and then I'll compare them to a couple of suburbs in Sydney to actually physically show them the difference in the stats. And more often than not, the stats are actually quite close. In many cases, the different Newcastle suburbs I'm picking out will actually be a high. And of course, we're talking about medium to long term. So the last 10 years, what's the average growth rate been year on year over the last 10 years? It's interesting to note that we're on par with Sydney, and in some cases, we'll be slightly above Sydney.
Interesting. I agree with that, Kev, too, because I think the thing that the listeners should understand is that Sydney is sort of obviously a lot more expensive. Your median house price in Sydney is almost $1.7 million now. So it's considered sort of less affordable for the majority of the population. So Newcastle, I think, has more propensity to increase in value. And that's why I think you'll start to see it become an even more attractive destination for investors over time. Let's talk about the factors driving the Brisbane market, Kevin. What are the standout trends? What's changing in the Newcastle Hunter property market right now? What sort of things are you seeing that's trending?
Okay. Well, I think probably affordability is probably the thing that's always going to stand out. And I think you just sort of touched on that there. So, being able to come in and obviously pay a lot less, so your mortgage is a lot lower, receiving a high return and being on par with growth rates. I think that's probably a trend that, not necessarily new, but that's a trend that people are understanding that will be fairly consistent here in Newcastle. So I think that's good for all walks of life, whether you're an investor or whether you're an owner-occupier, looking for a property, or even a mum and dad developer. So I think that they're probably the main stats. The population growth rate, I think, is very important. So that's always quite high, again, because it's just a lovely, attractive area to live at an affordable price point.
Okay. Tell me about infrastructure projects, Kevin. Are there any big projects? Is there any defence stuff happening? You're not far from Williamstown, but what's the major infrastructure that's really shaping the region at the moment?
Okay, sure. Another good question. That I think there's always multiple infrastructure projects going on between roads and other things, but I think probably the one that comes to mind the most is the Newcastle Airport. Okay, so the Newcastle Airport is due, if all goes well, with current works happening, but that's due to hopefully take on international flights as early as August. So let's just say the second half of this year. So they're currently upgrading the terminal, the infrastructure. So they've already upgraded the runway to allow the big international jets to come in. Right. Yeah. So, and that's exciting. So we're just waiting on which destination, but it could be something like a Kuala Lumpur, for example. So I think that's going to be really interesting, because that's going to open up more import exports, tourism, and of course allow business to even grow a lot further for the region.
That's awesome. And I remember you mentioned a while back too, in terms of students and the new law courts. Tell us about that.
Yeah. Okay. So we've actually got you got the new university campus in the city that opened up a few years ago. I think that was a $54 million project. We've got another campus that's under construction. We've got, I saw recently on the planning portals, we've got new buildings that have been approved, 2 houses, one that's housing almost 500 students in the CBD. We've got a new college that was opened up a couple of years ago, which was actually the renovation of the old courthouse in Newcastle, and that's a college specifically for Japanese and Asian students. So that's really interesting. So there is a lot of international flavours. And Newcastle University here is within the top 200 in the world. So it's actually quite highly regarded. So again, and I think that's just allowed the avenue for further growth.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah. I mean, last time I was up there, I was walking around the foreshore areas, out toward the lighthouse and all around Honeysuckle Wharf areas. And it's just a really lovely precinct. They've got rid of a lot of the heavy industrial sort of activity and got rid of the heavy rail, got the light rail that goes through. But it's a much more, I don't know, it's just got a really nice feel to it, right?
It has, very livable. That's right. So the old heavy station is there, but that's been turned into a new, I guess, communal area. So they have markets, they have festivals, they have concerts. It's really exciting, and they've actually just recently had approval for all the foreshore park down there at Nobby's Beach to be redesigned. That's been approved. So again, that's another exciting thing for families and kids and what have you. So that's just sort of constantly evolving, but you're right, it's such a lovely, livable city. You've also got the East End development in the CBD, which a new developer is basically developing 3 whole city blocks, and that's changed the face of the CBD as well, to bring in young purchasers, downsizers, investors, the new businesses opening up as well. So a lot has happened in the last 5-6 years.
Awesome. I'd like to pick your brain, Kevin. Being a local, this is the gold here, but are there any suburbs or pockets in Newcastle or the Hunter you think are flying under the radar? So, you often get that term called ripple effect of growth, and one suburb grows, but the neighbouring suburb hasn't grown much. But where do you think the pockets of value are, if you like, in both the Hunter or Newcastle? We really appreciate you tuning in to the Property Buyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Property Buyer Podcast. It would be a big help, and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links. And now, let's get back to the podcast.
Okay, yeah, well, there's actually quite a few, and obviously we intimately talk about those with individual clients. Once we're formally working with them, and that's evolving. Okay, so each year that can change, or even sometimes every few months, in terms of infrastructure. We're very much, I guess, in the know to town planning changes, zoning changes. Okay, so there's a number of train stations which have recently been highlighted for zoning changes. Okay, so there's there's pockets around those locations, for example, that are allowing extra development, because obviously we've got a shortage of housing. We've got pockets that the rental vacancy rates, the majority of the suburbs that I work with are between 0.1% to 1% in terms of rental vacancy rates. Okay, so obviously we highlight those sort of areas for investors, which allows further growth, with their rents each year. But again, so we're looking at your low supply, high demand areas. but there's many, Rich. I mean, do we have enough time to go through?
No, we don't have 3 hours, unfortunately. But look, we're just giving our audience the highlights today. So, tell us more about also buyer demand. It's kind of shifted a lot since COVID. COVID changed a lot of things, but has there been, I guess, more demand across Newcastle and Hunter since COVID hit with the hybrid work from home trend? Has that been a big factor in the market?
It has, absolutely. And I think that's continuing. So, we work, for example, with our investor clients who are looking for that high growth, and we talked about granny flats. So, that's obviously been helpful too, with people designing an extra area, where they can house a studio or even bring in sort of further rent. So that's continuing. I think the commercial sector was obviously disadvantaged, probably, if you could say, from COVID, because a lot of, everybody moved away from commercial. But that part of the market, I think, is sort of changing again. But I think, the intergenerational families, I think that part of it is always going to be the case, because it's expensive for people to buy in.
Yep.
So a lot of people are looking for those homes where they can house their kids for longer. Look at Japan. In Japan, they have intergenerational families, living in these small houses. So we're sort of moving towards that area here in Australia as well.
Yeah,
a lot of Sydney.
Got it. Are you able to sort of pinpoint any price points or property types that you think are offering better value for investors and home buyers? Like, is buying something in Newcastle at $1 million better than buying at, say, a unit at 600? I don't know, give me some price points, and sort of where you think the value sits at the moment.
Okay, I think let's look at, say, the strategy of a house granny flat, for example, where if we look at I guess price points between, say, $1 million to, say, 1.2, somewhere sort of in that bracket.
Yep.
So there's certain areas where we can be finding a decent quality home with a granny flat, and you're bringing in something around that $1,100 to $1,300 a week between the two properties. So the house might be achieving $650 per week. The 2-bedroom granny flat might be achieving $550 per week. Obviously that's fantastic value, and that's a recession-proof type of property. So they're the sort of places that I love to find. I think a really smart, smart strategy.
That's good. Yeah. So it's not going for a singular home at $2.5 million and just putting all your eggs in the one basket. You're saying that buying that affordable price point, it's going to have a consistent rental. It's right in the sweet spot of the median prices. That's going to turn over a much better return long term.
I think so, but on the other side of the coin, like I have properties in my own portfolio where, they're well located strata properties, and they're in areas which, I never have vacancy periods. The growth rates are actually quite close to the house price growth rate. So there might only be a difference of 1% or even 0.5% there. So the difference is the demographics are changing. So a lot of young professionals, even people downsizing, are wanting to be in those trendy hubs, where they don't want the maintenance, right? So on the contrary, if you just got to be very, very picky, and that's where obviously we come in. So I think it probably depends on the budget.
Got it.
And what the requirements and what the goals are for each individual person.
Yeah, cool. Kevin, I want to ask you about the buyer types. Who's buying, and I guess some more demand drivers. But what are the most active type of buyers coming into Newcastle? Are you seeing more investors or downsizers or young families? What's the makeup?
Yeah, okay. It's probably a good cross-section of all the above. I think some of the investors have, I guess, sort of been sitting on the fence, if you like, over the last 12 months. So, my recent clients over the last 6 months have probably been more owner-occupiers, first home buyers, and that's only because the investors are just sort of sitting, waiting, watching the media. The smart ones are the people that are understanding the market and getting in now before we have further interest rate reduction. So it's probably across the board, but I'd expect a lot of the investors will probably be jumping in the market, sort of back half of this year, if you like.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. And what about the sort of overflow from Sydney? Are you seeing an exodus of Sydney buyers that are coming north because they're just seeing that affordability, or are they coming from other areas, do you think?
Look, I think I've always had, I guess, a large percentage of the people that I'm dealing with from Sydney, but it's because once they're educated on the Newcastle market here, they understand that it is actually quite Sydney-like.
Mm.
The growth rates of both houses and apartments are either in line, okay, with the Sydney growth rates, if not better. And we can come back to talking about the rental yields. We're usually 1 to 1.5% above, and your buy-in price, as you mentioned earlier, is a lot lower. So I think that's the key, and I think that's always going to be the way. Yes, I do have some international expats, but I think that'll just continue on.
Yeah, definitely. Well, there's definitely a lot of interest. I talk to a lot of investors all day, every day, and Newcastle is definitely on a lot of people's radars, and it should be. I think it's an area that some people should really take a lot closer look at. So, Kevin, you've dealt with hundreds of clients before, both home buyers and investors. Are you able to give us an example or a recent purchase of how you helped a client score a really good deal and perhaps avoid a really costly mistake?
Gee, okay. I have many of those stories, but I guess a recent, I guess a couple of recent stories. One was a purchase early this year. It was actually negotiated over the Christmas break, but it probably came down more of a patience and just being smart, where we purchased a new property, a new attached duplex in an area that has very, very few new properties. So we're talking about on the cusp of the CBD. We purchased the property $100,000 less than the adjoining identical property.
How did you do that?
Was sold. It was only sold a month earlier. And it boiled down to me having met the developer, knowing that it was actually a lady, but she had other projects to go on and to move on to. Okay, so I knew, well, hang on, if we not a great deal happens over that Christmas break, if we just patient. We keep the conversation sort of moving along. We had a couple of other sort of options as well in our pocket. And I knew that, okay, come January, when we everybody's sort of back into the market, there could possibly be a change of tune. And the adjoining property sold for 1.6, and we purchased this property for 1.5. But again, I guess it was a sort of just being patient, sticking to our guns, and the developer owner going, okay, let's take the money run. We offered a short settlement, so we offered favourable terms. So that's a good example. I've had a recent purchase, an off-market purchase for a first home buyer for a well-located apartment in an area called Cook's, which is sort of like the Paddington of Sydney. Again, it was a property that she would never have access to. And again, she'd been looking in the market for quite some time, was procrastinating. So again, it was great to see her get in, and that only occurred a couple of weeks ago. So my goal was to have her into the market before the 1st of June, before we had further interest rate rise, because she would be competing against a lot more people. So they're the sort of stories that are rewarding.
Right. And what about a sort of unsuspecting buyers, perhaps, that try to do it on their own? What are the kind of mistakes they can make? Because I believe there's certain areas around the Hunter where there's a lot of mine subsidences, I believe, for example. But are there any other examples or things that people unsuspectingly should be aware of in those areas?
There's a lot of answers for that, but I have come across a number of people where they've almost been not conned, but almost fallen for the house and land type package purchase, where they've been offered, this great deal. And when I sort of delve into the statistics in terms, okay, well, look, here's the last 10 years average growth rate for that suburb and that location. Let me compare it to an area that I think would be probably a better option for you. Often there could be a difference of between 1 to 2.5%, sometimes even 3% difference in the yearly growth rate.
So what you're talking about, just to backtrack, you're talking about people that are buying or being spruiked off the plan houses, like 3 or 4 bedroom houses on postage stamp size blocks of 250 square meters. They look shiny and brand new, but you're telling me that these people that buy them and, they think it's all great, sold on tax deductions, end up buying it and then realizing it's a slow grower. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yep. I guess that's the thing, isn't it? I mean, that's the huge advantage a buyer's agent brings to the table, because you've seen the trends and the resale of those kind of properties versus buying an established plot property on a bigger block of 600 or 700 square meters. Even though it's an older property, you don't get the tax deductions. It doesn't matter, right? Because you're saying that established property is going to grow at a much faster rate over time.
Correct. And I mean, there's just so much other intimate information that I know, just being sort of at the coalface here. Let's say it's someone, a young purchaser who wants to be right in the city. They want a strata property. Okay, great. I said I've got some of my best performing properties in my own portfolio are strata properties. However, you've just got to be very cautious. You've got to be very picky. There's buildings out there that I'm very familiar with that have building issues. I know that some of the buildings are going to have future special levies struck, all sorts of issues, right? So again, just being at the coalface, I'm aware of the buildings to stay away from, and I'm aware of the buildings that we'll buy into. So just again, that local knowledge, having the best building and pest inspectors. I see a lot of these reports that are that sort of come with a property building inspection report coming with the property, but they're abbreviated reports. That they, I remember one client who had picked a property up. So we were doing an appraise and negotiate on a property. I think this was in Warners Bay area, Lake Macquarie region. So my role was to bid at the auction. Of course, I'll come and have a look at the property to see what we're going to be bidding on. There was a building pest report. Went through that. Did an inspection myself. There was a subfloor area. I found a live termite nest.
Wow.
Right, so and they had a professional building pest inspector that had done reports. And so, they're just a lot of the things, the pitfalls. There's flood areas here. There's so much information that you've got to be aware of. There's so many pitfalls, and that's where we come in. We just make it easy for people.
That's great. I kind of jumped to the next question, but are there any other advantages that people and the property buyer can give to clients that use you in the Newcastle Hunter market? Is there any other edges you have in terms of delivering that service for them?
Look, I guess we do have access to off-market properties as well. So there's opportunity, I guess, to have access to a lot more choice.
How do you tap into that? How do you find that market?
That comes with years and years of relationships, and knowing who to work with and sometimes who not to work with. But that's just years and years and years of being in the industry for for as long as I have. And that you've, of course, that's because you've done the right thing. You've acted with integrity. So people come to me, Kev, look, we've got this property. We've got a client here. They don't really want people traipsing through. They don't want open for inspections. They're wanting to do an off-market sale. Come and have a look. Let's see if it's going to match with some of your clients. So, that's what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Perfect. So, Kev, if a client comes to you and they say, look, I've got a budget of, for example, 800 to $1 million, how do you go about selecting and shortlisting the right suburbs and the right property for that kind of buyer?
Yeah, I guess I'd be spending a lot of time with the client and sort of delving deeper into some of the requirements they're looking for. And I guess listening to that client, because that's important, is not, buying something you think that's going to be right for them. I think it's just probably understanding what they're looking to achieve, whether it be short-term, medium-term, long-term. And I think once we've got that information, the budget they're working with, then we can sort of narrow it down to location, but also a property type, okay, and a strategy that's going to work specifically for them. So there's no cookie cutter method. Every client has got different requirements, different budgets. There's no one requirement the same. And that's, I think, the thing that I like about the job. It allows so much individuality and variation, if you like.
Yeah, it's very much a tailored service, isn't it? Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
We've talked a bit about interest rates and that sort of thing, but what advice would you give to buyers that are sort of still sitting on the fence and worried about interest rates and media headlines? What would you say to them?
try not to listen too much to media.
Shower, right?
Yeah. Look, I think probably talk to people like ourselves, people who are at the coalface in the market and get the right advice. I think that's you should know. I remember doing that myself, years and years ago before moving into the market, being very cautious, being very cautious and very tentative and missing out at times. However, once you understand, if you can align yourself with professional people, and that's what we do. We have the best solicitors with us. We have the best, the most respected and trusted building pest inspectors. We've got town planners. I've got tradesmen that I can rely on to get quotes quickly on things. So I think for those people, just align yourself with good, professional, trusted people.
That's good. Yeah, look, I've predicted that interest rates were going to come down for some time. I think we're going to see another 3 rate cuts potentially before December, which is just going to reactivate the market and get a lot more buyers back in the market. It makes lending a bit more affordable. So instead of 3 or 4 people bidding at an auction, there'll be 4, 5, 6, maybe 7 people bidding. So I think the sooner that buyers who are sitting on the fence get off that fence, get pre-approval and start taking action, they're going to be better off, because I think we're in for a price rise of somewhere between 15% to 20% over the next 24 months, Kevin. That's what I think is going to happen.
Absolutely. I totally agree. Totally agree.
I've only got 2 more questions for you, Kev. Then we can, time for a nice drink. But tell me, for someone who's listening to this podcast and thinking about buying in the Newcastle, Hunter, Lake Macquarie region, why would they consider using you in the property buyer team, do you think?
I guess I think that relates to probably a lot of things that we've already talked about. You're working with some of the most experienced people in the industry, but not only, of our background, but we're caring. Okay, so we want to see the best outcome for our clients, and the way I operate, I know that all of us operate the same way. I sort of become that person, right? So I've got a budget. These are the different things that I'm looking for, but what would I buy with all my knowledge that I've got? What am I going to buy? Which area, which location? So I sort of clone myself into that person, whether, as if it's a family friend or a good mate of mine.
Nice. Yeah,
so I think, and we're genuine, we're caring. So, and that sort of flows on. And then, of course, we've got access to all of the, as I mentioned, the trusted professional people and the relationships that we've built over the last 30 years with agents on the ground as well.
Yeah, cool. And your outlook for Newcastle, do you think the growth is going to continue? Is it going to stagnate? What's your outlook for the market?
No, I think it's what you just mentioned there. I definitely see between a 10 to 20% increase in the next sort of 12 to 18 months in property prices. The market's been a little bit subdued in the last 12 months. And when I say subdued, I mean that a lot of investors have been sitting on their hands. However, I think the smarter buyers will understand that, the interest rate, the multiple interest rate cycles that we potentially going to have will obviously really stimulate the market along. So, getting in really before, I guess probably I see the ideal buying time is over the next 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
Before those interest rates continue to come down.
Yeah, awesome. Last question for you. What's the best property tip that you can share with our audience today? Or something that you might have received, or just something you've made up on the spot? What's the best property tip?
Property tip in terms of
just investing, anything. Yeah, maybe it's a renovation tip, an investing tip. What would be your best tip you'd like to leave with the audience today?
Well, okay. I think buying a property, if your budget allows it, if you can potentially have a property that has the potential to have multiple tenancy, or to improve that property in some way to increase your rent, that's also going to increase the value of the property, so you can actually create value yourself. And sometimes it may not be, it may not be structural changes. It could be simply upgrading, doing a cosmetic upgrade with a new kitchen or new paint or new colours. But and that's what I like to do. I like to see potential in a property, and that could be sometimes quite small, or it could be something large. Having enough yard, or having a second street where we can add a secondary dwelling, such as a granny flat, to increase the rent and increase the value of the property. So there's probably quite a few. It's probably the potential of the property is probably
Fantastic.
The best answer I can give.
Great answer. Well, Kevin Mason, thank you so much for sharing some great knowledge with us today. I'm sure our audience have got some really good value out of it. So if you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to go to the propertybuyer.com.au website, where you'll see Kevin's profile, all of his past purchases, and reach out, please, if you're interested in buying a property in the Newcastle, Hunter, Lake Macquarie area and surrounds, then Kevin is your man. But Kev, thank you so much for being with us today.
Pleasure, Rich. Thanks again for the invite. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry, and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au, where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer podcast.